This shit actually happened to me. When I was about 15, me and my friends decided to go camping in the woods behind my house. It's a fairly large forest of about 17 square miles, almost untouched, no trails, no dirt bike tire marks, no random hicks looking to shoot you for being on their private hunting property. We packed up all of the shit we needed, tents, sleeping bags, a lighter, etc., and I carried my great knife, and we walked for about a day. We then decided to camp in my least favorite spot in the woods. See, if you went back far enough in my woods, you'd find a bunch of animal heads on sticks. They liked creepy shit like that way before I started to get a kick out of it, so I was outvoted 2-1. I made an executive decision that I got to carry anything I could kill something with, then. So we set up camp and cooked hot dogs over the fire and shit. Russell even caught a snake and decided to eat it. He always was a little strange. As soon as it started to get dark, we piled a bunch of twigs and wet sticks on the fire so it would burn for longer, and we decided to split up and explore around. See if we could find anything scary or downright terrifying. I found nothing, Corey found nothing, Russell found a squirrel hanging from a tree on a noose. Weird people live out in those woods. So, eventually, we all got tired of sitting around and losing the game and talking, and we were just normal tired. Corey and Russell went to bed, but if anyone here knows me, then you know I'm an insomniac, a really bad one. So I sat up in my tent, keep the fire going, and watched the stars. It was lonely. Until I actually fell asleep. I woke up in my tent soon after, however, to the deafening sound of utter silence. It was fucking horrible. There was this sound of a high-pitched screeching in my ears as they rung with total quiet. Then, suddenly, even that sound disappeared, and the forest around the tent seemed to be stifled, as if trying to control its breathing so something couldn't hear it. I held my breath, reaching under my pillow for my great knife. Something was in our campsite. I couldn't see it, couldn't hear it, couldn't smell it, but I could feel it, kind of like sense it. Like if it knew I could sense it in any other manner, I would die a death legendary in hell. I flattened myself against the floor and prayed to anyone who was listening that this would pass soon. It didn't for an hour, almost. When the sun finally came up, I burst out of my tent, ready to do whatever I had to do to escape the fear, and found that Corey and Russell were still asleep, and there was nothing there. Whatever it was, it had left with the coming of daylight. I woke them and we left right then. I've never gone back and I never will.
Already posted it a few days ago, but why not post it again? Over a year ago I moved out of my parents' house, for the second time, into my own place. No roommates, no sister, just me, which is exactly what I wanted. I still got lonely, but the whole idea was to focus on bettering myself among other things. Of course it didn't go so well, and I felt worse and worse even though I was better at my place than my parents. To cope, I had this habit starting high school, to go on night walks whenever I was sad, felt lonely, or whatever, to air my thoughts. Since I was in a new place, I had to find new routes and get my bearings. See, my house is in a village in the middle of the French countryside, near one of the last truly wild rivers of Europe. There are few inhabitants, fewer people out at night and no traffic, but that only meant I had the stars, the marsh, a forested area, the river, and all its wildlife to myself. Very soon I had a few routes and a favorite place, on the riverbank, at the edge of the marsh. The absolute definition of peaceful, surrounded by trees and bush, you could only hear the water flowing and nocturnal birds. It was also somewhat concealed by a large, crooked tree that formed a natural place to sit comfortably. This place though is especially dark, even when the moon is out it's very dim. In just the first 2 months I went a few times a week in the evening, in the middle of the night, or just before daybreak with nothing weird happening. One unremarkable night, when I went there, I was surprised to find someone sitting in the dark, on my spot. I was a tad annoyed, but I said hi and sat nonetheless because I have no conception of personal space. The only answer I got was a hum and a strange smell, kind of like sweat, dirt, and raw fish mixed together, so I immediately assumed it was a hobo. I have no animosity toward hobos since my uncle was stranded on the street at some point, so I decided to strike conversation and mumbled something about the beauty of the spot, and if it was the first time said hobo came around. She, as it turned out, answered timidly in a very thick patois with a few words of French thrown in there, a bit of Breton also I assumed. However, that language was entirely alien to me, though I vaguely understood the general idea that the answer was no and that she liked the place too. Despite the language barrier, we got to talk a little bit about where she was from, where she was going, and I guessed that she didn't know, without being able to make heads or tails of what all the rest of the words were about. Despite that, she seemed happy that I talked to her, or at least tried to, and thanked me. I figured she was alone in the area, so I asked her if she wanted me to bring her something to eat, since my house wasn't too far, but she refused politely, with all the politeness in the world in fact, so much so that it felt weird. I decided to go home not too long after, and told her to take care. On my way I felt watched but didn't pay much attention to it since that's usually how it goes at night. A few days later I came back, and she was there, so I went and sat next to her. She said hi before I could utter a syllable, which led me to think that she was happy to see me. We once again tried to talk, but it quickly turned into a French lesson for her since she kept repeating what I said, pointed at things and asking how they were called, behavior that you would expect from an eager child in class. Truth be told, it was kind of fun. When I told her that I was going home, she asked me timidly, in a very, very broken French, if I was going to come back. The reasonable and slightly paranoid thing to say would have been no, since I knew nothing about her, but absolutely out of character I told her I'd be back again. And I did come back, not just once, but for weeks, not just for her but also because after the third or fourth time seeing her I understood that it made me feel good to talk to another human being, and what's more, to help her. Soon she started to understand me better, and likewise, though her accent was thick as hell and she still fumbled on her words or didn't know how to say a lot of things. At some point I thought that I might as well bring food with me, and she'd eat it, not as an all the eggs thing, but still I wanted to make sure that she did eat properly, and I made the mistake of asking her what she usually ate. Raw fish and berries. From this point on I thought that she was a power hobo. Still, she was really happy that I brought her food, and never skipped a thank you. Better, often she'd say it twice or thrice. Once I brought her cake I made during the day, and she was all fuzzy while I was there. I even saw her smile, which was a first. She was still very timid and polite, but the French lesson became more and more of a friendly chat rather than a professor addressing her student, and though discussion subjects were few, we enjoyed each other's company. When summer was almost over and the brisk autumnal wind came around with its lot of cold nights, I was surprised, albeit glad, that she was still there, and so I asked her if she had a shelter nearby. Her answer was negative. Then I asked her if she had any plans for the winter. No. I figured that since I still had my heart in my chest and my body wasn't dumped in the river with a cinder block, I'd suggest that she could come stay at my house. At first she was reluctant, but she just did not want to bother me anymore, and so I brought her home after a thorough is okay speech. We went along the river for a while, so I tried to make her more comfortable before we veered onto the main street and then through the village to my house. I turned the key, lit the room, turned around and finally saw her face in the light, and I can tell you right now that she looked just like she talked, timid and cute, smaller than me, thin, very long tied brown hair, full cheeks, thin lips. Now sure, she desperately needed a proper shower with a truckload of soap, but it seemed to me that she did wash herself in the river, which is certainly better than nothing. Her clothes, however, looked very old and belonged in the trash. Seeing how filthy and smelly they were, I could not have washed them even if I wanted to, considering they were all almost solid. Torn, and quite frankly I could not figure out what fabric they were made from, and there were no tags either. When I told her she could, not to mention should, take a shower, she was ecstatic. I guided her to the bathroom, showed her how the whole thing worked, told her to take her time, and pulled a few clothes of mine from the cupboard and left her to it. Something like an hour and a half later I heard her coming down the stairs. all clean and floating in a sweater of mine. However, I noticed that her hair were a mess. I guessed she could not untangle them herself and didn't want to bother me. Fortunately, my little sister had long hair too growing up, so I'm not too bad with a brush. I offered her a seat and went to work in an awkward silence that was only broken by a thank you accompanied with some teary eyes. We talked for a few hours until we were tired, so I set her up on a single mattress in my office. We went to bed at the same time, but she quickly woke me up because she was scared, sleeping alone in a silent room after so long. At this point I moved her bed to my own room. I woke up the next day to her snoring in my bed, wrapped in the blanket I gave her. She didn't even disturb my sheets, like a cat would have masterfully done. After being embarrassed for a whole 5 seconds, I got up and went on with my day. A few hours later she was finally up and, polite as always, came up to me with rosy cheeks to apologize both for sleeping so long and for the bed theft. When she was done eating, we went to the store to get her some supplies I felt she needed, like her own shampoo, and some clothes of her own since mine were in short supply. Again, she thanked me profusely and was fuzzy all day long. For a few weeks life went on pleasantly, and despite her trouble getting used to life in a house, she started helping with cooking, cleaning and other daily tasks, picked up books and tried to better her understanding of French. I even got her into Tekken. I still caught her in my bed from time to time, on days when she was either feeling particularly anxious or happy. In a word, we built trust, and a true relationship. One night when I had trouble sleeping, I caught her sneaking into my bed for the first time, and as she thought she was being discreet, she went to hug me softly. I spooked her when I said hi, but she quickly laughed it off and then became very serious all of a sudden. She muttered that she had to tell me something, and so she started her speech with the longest thank you note I have ever heard, only to finish with, "But I haven't told you the whole truth." She admitted that she wasn't really homeless, that she fled her home, or rather, her family, because they were abusive and, according to her, total nuts. They were apparently recluse, living in the middle of nowhere in a bunch of troglodyte houses, and the most bizarre part is that her family had been living in there for years, and her parents were raised there too. She fled, because she didn't want that. She cried in my chest that night. In the morning, she asked me what I thought about it all, and if she was still welcome. To be frank, I was pretty stunned, and I didn't get the whole picture in between the crying and her very apparent distress, but I reassured her that I didn't want her to leave, at all. She seemed relieved and immediately hugged me and thanked me again and again. Still, that whole thing bothered me, and I asked her a few questions. Remember the whole eating raw fish and berries? That's something she learned from them, since they lived like hunter-gatherers with light agriculture. The fuzzy feeling with cake? She basically never ate anything sweeter than a wild strawberry. Thoroughly explaining the shower? They used fresh/rainwater and a bucket. The old clothes? They stole whatever they couldn't produce. And then the big what? The alien language. They started talking like this with time, because her parents, her grandparents before, and even further up, talked less and less French/Breton the more isolated they got. See, she's probably younger than me, and my own grandparents were born in the 50s. I imagine that with no contraception in sight, hers might be the age of my own parents, so born in the end of the 70s and 80s. She said that every living relative she's ever known was raised in that house. They never welcomed anyone new in the family, though it is quite extensive, something like 3 or 4 households. I don't remember correctly, but I'll ask her again in the morning if you want. She was raised in an inbreeding fest, and was promised to one of her cousins. I had never heard of anything like this in the 21st century, all Alabama and Pas-de-Calais/Nord memes aside. Of course, she explained all of this to me over a few days, but even then I don't think I know everything, and I'm not sure I'd have wanted to at the time either. From this point on, I took the time to ask her when she didn't know about something, and she became more open about what she didn't understand too. Over the next few weeks, we went to see doctors in order to make sure she was healthy, to get vaccinated and all of this, but also social assistance to try and give her citizenship, or at least regularize her situation, since if we had been pulled over by the police, her lack of ID would have been an issue. Technically she was a ghost to the system, and the French administration being a nightmare. Some of her papers are still pending examination, however it brought us closer. Very much closer, because at some point she stopped sneaking into my bed. Today her accent is still perceptible, but most people don't question it since her French isn't fantastic either. On the plus side, she can talk with some of the old ladies more easily, because using Breton words as an automatism tends to make them nostalgic, or hateful. It's a double-edged sword. And here it is. Sorry for the weird format. As you might have guessed, English isn't my mother tongue and Greentext isn't my preferred format. If you have any questions, I can answer some of them, and my GF too if you're polite enough. Thank you. We do have a whole lot of plans for the future. I would very much like to call her my wife, for one, and she's very passionate about becoming a mother despite her tough upbringing. Also, it might sound weird considering everything, but Enora would like to go back to living in the forest at some point. In a house with amenities and not removed from society like she was during her childhood, simply to remain close to nature as she always was. I like that idea, and it sounds healthy to raise children this way. You can bet your ass that it won't be around here, though. She wants to stay very, very far away from her family. It is, isn't it? On getting a job, she would very much like to, believe me. However, her French isn't perfect and she sometimes needs help to read. She absolutely loves books. Her education at large is pretty bare. For example, she barely did any math at all, as a child. Some things, she outright doesn't understand, so she needs to catch up before trying to get any sort of job. She's getting better and better though. To add insult to injury, there's the administrative headache. Try getting a job without any diploma in an unemployment-ridden country such as France. Nonetheless, I don't mind her trying to get a job nor staying at home. In fact, I feel better knowing she's safe and no one is trying to take advantage of her. It's selfish, I know. She's not worried about her family, they're recluse after all, and Enora thinks they wouldn't really care to go after someone that ran away after so long. I'll say that though, we often go camping because we both like that, but there's a whole area she doesn't want us to go anywhere near. The hills have eyes, you see. Well, my family knows about her, except I haven't told them about the whole Butcher's Creek thing. I can't think of any way this would help their relationship, and it's already pretty complicated. The official story, for anyone who asks, is that she immigrated from the Balkans. No one really questions it all that much, despite the fact that it's obvious bullshit. I came up with it on the spot the first time I was asked and stuck with it for consistency's sake. Her accent is vaguely similar, but that's it. I barely have any friends, so they're mostly okay with her. In fact, they're very welcoming considering. We go eat at my parents' every so often to see my mom, who is very good and accepting to Enora. She knew right away that she was good for me, and she's always polite with her too, so I guess it helps. My father and sister are a bit suspicious about her, and not very welcoming at all, often rude. My sister doesn't really like her at all. She thinks Enora is either weird, I can understand why, a gold digger, or just plain stupid. We had to leave abruptly a few times, but not because of my girl's behavior, that's for sure. Maybe the supposed age gap comes into play. She looks young, I'll give you that, but we don't really know how old Enora is. Somewhere around 17 to 21 at most, maybe. She's not older than me, that's for sure, and she's not growing up anymore. Her family wasn't big on age, they were more concerned about maturity, according to her. I know how fucked up this sounds, and it is. A doctor's appointment told me that she wasn't a minor and healthy. I love her, she loves me. That's good enough for me.
Alright, I've got a hell of a story. I'm not a very supernaturally inclined person, and have always shied away from anything to do with ghosts, spirits, etc. But to this day I can't really provide any rational explanation for this story. Hope you enjoy. It's all true. I'm not here to laugh. Camping on the eastern coast of Australia around Christmas a couple of years ago. In a shitty old 4WD with my parents and sister. It was getting towards evening and we'd been driving for a couple of hours, with a particular destination in mind to camp for the night. We get to the turnoff for the national park where we were gonna camp. When we get to the camping ground, it is absolutely packed. Like, sardine level. I guess that because we were in that Christmas, New Year period, a lot of people were out and about. Needless to say, we were gonna need to find another place to sleep. We start to drive back along the dirt road towards the highway, a little disheartened as we didn't know any alternative spots to sleep nearby. We suddenly notice another road leading off of the one we were on. I can't remember if we noticed it on the way down, but we noticed it now. Still had probably an hour of light, so we decided we'd drive down it for a while and see if it led to anywhere we could pitch a tent. It's pretty badly maintained, full of divots and crap, but the car seems to be handling it. We follow this road for a fair while before we end up in a little clearing besides the bank of this broad tidal river. It's really, really beautiful, but there's no grass, so we decide to keep looking. We notice that there are several roads departing from the clearing, besides the one we entered it by. We pick one and start to drive down it. Night is encroaching quite rapidly. I'd say that by this point we had maybe 45 minutes of light left to find somewhere. We drive and drive, through what seems like a maze of shitty dirt roads, before we end up at this weird little car park. We seem to be at the top of some sort of hill, and a small walking track that began at the car park lead down into the forest. We decide to scout it out, hoping that we might get lucky. After about a minute or two on this track, suddenly we emerge from the trees and are looking down into this absolutely fucking picturesque camping spot. The ground where we were standing sloped gently down to form this beautiful little gully, covered with short grass. It was really small, basically the perfect size for a couple of tents. To the left, a path between some rocky ridges led directly to the beach, which can't have been more than 25 meters away. To the right, the crease of the valley continued, with the grass giving way to some low-lying trees and longer grasses. We were absolutely gobsmacked. Not 5 minutes ago we were somewhat frantically trying to find somewhere to sleep, and suddenly we found ourselves in what I would confidently call the most beautiful camping spot I've ever seen. However, something wasn't right. From the moment we came out of the tree line and first caught a sight of the spot, something felt wrong. Like really fucking wrong. This inexplicable, simmering dread had come over us all, and we all felt it. I'm not talking about feeling a bit scared. Our bodies, on an base instinctual level, were telling us to get the fuck out of this place. As we descended to the base of the valley, we noticed a black crow sitting on a lower branch of one of the trees to the right side. It was just sitting there, motionless, staring at us. That may sound cheesy or creepy, but honestly we weren't that shook by it, because Aussie crows do tend to stare. It wasn't out of the ordinary. We walked out to the beach, and then back, across the grass, into the trees. We were having a bit of a look around, and we ended up finding this little pool of tepid water, we call it a billabong, with a huge shell midden beside it. For those who don't know, Shell middens are piles of shells and other things created by Aboriginal people living in an area pre-colonization. Evidently, the Aboriginal people thought this spot was just as nice as we did. We continued through the trees, and before long the valley ended at the bank of the same tidal river we saw earlier. It's quite something to behold. We've managed to somewhat shake off our earlier fears, and are feeling a little more light-hearted. We start back towards the grass, so we can head back to the car to get our tents etc. The crow is still sitting on the branch. We're watching it for a few seconds, and then it just drops dead. It falls backwards off of the branch into the long grass. We all just look at each other, obviously horrified. All of our earlier fears have returned. Despite these obvious warning signs, we are still set on camping here, so we go up to the car and get our stuff. We're pitching the tent and Mum decides to go collect some wood for the fire. After a while we notice that she hasn't come back to the camp. Obviously, we're already on edge, so we drop what we're doing and go look for her. She's not on the beach. We begin to walk back through the trees. We find her, her eyes totally transfixed on the surface of the pool of water. We call out to her and it's like she snaps out of some weird hypnotic trance. Confusedly, she comes back to camp. We get the camp all set up. At this point we're probably 20 minutes from nightfall. Dad and I go out to the beach, just chatting or whatever. Look along the top of the ridge which looks down on the beach. There's a tall white figure standing along the top of the cliff looking down on us. We both just stare at it, terrified, trying to convince ourselves that it's just a rock or a tree trunk, or something fucking rational to explain what we're seeing. It's definitely not human, whatever the fuck it is. We go back to camp, having decided not to share what we've seen with the others. Really fucking shook by this point. The simmering dread is becoming more and more pronounced. Me and Dad sit down, and decide to try and unwind for a bit to get our mind off the situation. We were both into Magic the Gathering at the time, and we'd purchased a couple of booster packs earlier that day. Decide to open them and have a bit of fun. We opened probably 6 or 7 packs. Realized that without fail the rare card in each pack had been a black rare, some sort of demon, or something else relating to death. Absolutely inexplicable. It gets dark. Decide that it'd be best to just try and sleep. We all get into bed, but we're all too fucking terrified to sleep. After a while we start to drift off despite our fear, except Dad, who decides there's no way he's going to sleep, and that he may as well stay up, and keep an eye on things in case he needs to protect us or some shit. He's sitting on a rock outside of the tent. He sees something out of the corner of his eye. Turns quickly, and finds himself face to face with a massive completely white kangaroo, just staring at him. Albino kangaroos are very rare. He tells me it was at least 5 feet tall. Recall the tall white figure we saw earlier. Suddenly, an immense feeling of dread overcomes him, and he decides it's time for us to get the hell out of there. Wakes me up. I think the others were already awake. We pack up frantically and literally run out as quickly as we can. Get back to the car. It starts, thank fuck. The time is 11:02 p.m. Dad claims that he hadn't slept at all and that he'd been sitting outside for no more than an hour after we all went to bed. Somehow what he'd felt was an hour, was actually about 4 p.m. We somehow managed to navigate our way out of the maze of dirt roads and get back onto the highway. Words cannot describe the weight that lifted when we drove out of that place. It honestly felt like I'd just avoided death. We were all feeling kind of giddy, reeling from what had happened. Needed a place to sleep. Dad looks on his phone and finds an overnight spot nearby. Drive down the highway till we get to the turn-off. Follow the dirt road for a couple of minutes as it winds its way into the forest. End up in this fairly run-of-the-mill camping spot. There's a couple caravans around. Quickly pitch and get into bed, feeling very relieved. Finally at peace. Hear a faint sound, barely perceivable. It slowly gets louder. Louder. The sound suddenly gets dramatically louder, and we're starting to freak out again. I think it must be a plane passing really low overhead. Just when the sound gets almost unbearably loud, it passes us and begins to recede into the distance. Too exhausted to freak out, we all fall asleep. We all slept well. When we got up in the morning, the source of the previous night's sound became clear. Though we had been on the road to the campsite for several minutes, it was essentially just following the highway, and the campsite, which we thought was somewhat in the forest, actually bordered on the road. The sound we heard was a big freight truck driving down the highway, passing within 25 meters of where we were camped. After what happened that night, we did a little bit of research, and asked a couple questions. Apparently, there were some Aboriginal genocides which happened within that national park. Could it be that that picturesque valley was the location of one of them? That the spirits of those dead still lingered? On top of that, my father spoke to a friend of his who has worked closely with Aboriginal people. The albino kangaroo is a powerful symbol in Aboriginal folklore, the guardian of the dead.
Well, I guess I should tell this one cause I haven't before, and it's the only one I have. Shit happened about a year ago around this time in the wilderness to the north of Mount Thielsen in Oregon. I guess I don't really care if y'all believe me or not, I just want to know what you think. Day 1. Out for a camping trip with my good buddy Travis. Planned to spend a 3-day weekend bushwhacking and shooting and bullshitting. Start at the Pacific Crest Trail off Highway 138 and then head off trail about 2 miles in at the base of the mountain. First day was awesome, just drinking and not really much shooting because we wanted to get at least 5 more miles off trail so we wouldn't scare any of those hippie PCT hikers. Get really drunk by the end of the night and end up cowboy camping because we couldn't be bothered to set up our tents and the sky was clear. I remember waking up in the night once, not sure why, but, still being drunk, I promptly resumed my slumber. Day 2. Waking up I had a mean headache. And went down to the creek we camped near to get some water. I slipped out of my sleeping bag and put my Beretta 92 in my holster. Travis was already out and I assumed he also would be at the creek. When you sleep outside with no tent you tend to wake up at sunrise even if you are hungover. Heading down to the creek I'm hearing a lot splashing. Oh shit, I'm thinking I hope I don't catch Travis taking a fucking bath or something gay like that. I walk up to the cut bank and see. Below me about 15 feet in the water is a black-tailed deer thrashing caught against a log jam. It was a little doe, probably only a year and a half old at most. Something looked wrong about it but I couldn't see it very well because its thrashing was making the water real turbulent. There is a significant amount of blood in the water and I can see it flowing downstream. This deer looks real fucking crazy in the eyes though, I can see that. Well shit, I guess it probably fell in and broke its legs off this cut bank, or got impaled on some debris in the stream. Whatever it was obvious that this deer was a goner. Unfortunately I only had my 92 on me. I wasn't gonna put 10 rounds into this poor animal just to put it out of its misery, so I head back to where we camped and picked up my AR and walked back to the cut bank. Standing almost directly above the deer I put 3 rounds straight into its chest, the only part I could get a good aim at with it thrashing so much. She stops moving real fast. Well, I guess I can get some venison for today. Head around to where I can get down to the creek. Walk down to where she is stuck and wade into the water to retrieve her. As I get closer I notice some real fucked up shit. Her legs, all four, are completely skinned, just muscle, bone and tendon. When I start to pull her I notice belly is all cut up. Even slices horizontally across the whole bottom of her abdomen about 5 inches apart and a foot long. These cuts are real straight and parallel, like they were done with a scalpel or something. Just then I hear this real loud scream that sounds like Travis. Fuck. Leave the deer be and start running back to camp. My head still hurts like a bitch, but I've got adrenaline now and I don't really give a shit, so I'm running real fast. By the time I get back to camp I see Travis walking back rubbing his ass. I was taking a shit and some fucking hornet stung my goddamn ass, he says. Damn it, Travis. We each have a laugh and then I say I bring him down to the creek to see the stow. By the time we get there the deer is gone. Maybe it floated downstream, but this is a small creek, not a super strong current, and the log jam was undisturbed. We walked to the other bank where I was standing, and right next to my tracks in the mud were the weirdest tracks I've ever seen. The tracks were kind of triangular with one claw coming off the front, and the spacing between was really big, like 8 to 9 feet. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, we were pretty fucking spooked. We went back to our camp and got all our gear on and endeavored to get somewhere the fuck else. We decided to head up the mountain, get a good view and get to a place that wasn't so densely forested. Getting up near the tree line it starts to get real rocky and hard to cross, so we just keep hiking around the rim of the tree line for the remainder of the day. We set up camp today early and shoot shit and generally goof off, trying to shake off that shit and not ruin our weekend. I'm setting up some paper targets in our range and all of a sudden I start to hear this really loud high-pitched noise that was like ringing in my ears. But I knew it wasn't in my ears because I could hear it reverberating in the forest. I look back at Trevor, who is about 25 meters away. And he is looking off to the left with his AR leveled at something. He looks scared. Just as sudden as it started the ringing stops. Right as it stops every bird in every tree around us takes off, like at least 100 birds. I run back to him. As I'm running I trip over a loose rock and fall face first, AR in hand. Scraped up my AR pretty bad, but that's just some unrelated shittiness. I get up and keep running at him. When I reach him he still has his AR leveled and is scanning downhill into the forest. What the fuck was that? He doesn't say anything, he is just breathing real hard, and I can see the sweat on his face. Travis. I saw something down there, he says. His voice is shaky. What did you see? Took about 5 minutes before he would calm down. Enough to lower his weapon and speak to me. First thing he says is we're leaving. Right now. Okay, I can do that. JPG. We pack everything up and start heading back down towards the highway. At this point it's about 6 p.m. which means we will be hiking into the night. I point this out but he doesn't seem to care, so off we go. As we're walking he describes what he saw to me. He said it was jet black and tall enough to reach the first branches of the trees, which means it was about 20 feet tall. He noticed it right as the ringing sound started, and when he looked right at it it jumped straight up into the canopy. He said it jumped probably 30 to 40 feet straight up. I'm not one for paranormal conspiracy shit, but I wasn't about to debate him after what had happened that day. At about 11 p.m. we're still hiking and it's dark as fuck. I'm so tired. Travis is not tired, he has the look of a man possessed about him. We reach the trail and I breathe a sigh of relief. Some semblance of human society like a trail brings a surprising amount of assurance. At this point I get cell service back and call my wife to come pick us up in an hour when we get to the trailhead. She is pissed but says okay. Suddenly the ringing starts again. It's louder this time. We both start running like hell. Ahead of us on the trail a bunch of treetops start swaying back and forth. Travis stops dead and Mag dumps into the treetops. He is shooting wildly and it scares the fuck out of me. The ringing stops after he Mag dumps. We stand still for a second and it is dead silent. Then a noise like a clap of thunder goes off behind us and we bolt. We get to the trailhead about 20 minutes later. My wife pulls up a little after that and we get the fuck out of there. Never been back to those woods, don't want to go. I don't know if any of you have had anything like this, but it sure as hell scared the shit out of me. It has been many years since I have told anyone about my experience. I normally keep it to myself, as anyone I tell it to thinks I am crazy. I don't blame them either. If someone told me this story, I would think they were a lunatic. Be me. Just got out of high school, wanted to do something fun. I decide that I'll kayak through the Florida Everglades, by myself. My mom hates the idea, my dad thinks I'll be fine. I had been camping, backpacking, and kayaking for about 7 years then, so I was fairly experienced in bushcraft. Ergo, like my dad, I thought I would be fine. Boy was I wrong. As a precaution, my dad gives me my great-grandfather's old groundhog hunting rifle. MFW. My great-grandfather's groundhog rifle is a M1903 Springfield. Regardless, I grab my shit and rush off into the unknown. I decided to kayak around the Thousand Island portion of the Everglades. I pushed off at a small island known as Chokoloskee, and I made my way into the wild. I was ecstatic. Finally I get to enjoy my favorite hobby with no one around to bother me. I camp at a small dinky campground known as Mormon Key. Pig related. It was a 10+ mile kayaking trip to get there, plus part of that was just navigated through the mangroves. Needless to say, I was tired as fuck. Make camp, cook dinner, watch the sunset, and go to sleep. I wake up to howling in the distance. Sounds like a wolf. Problem is, wolves have been extinct in the Everglades since like 1910. Kinda weirded out, but there is a body of water between me and the howling, so I don't really dwell on it. I wake up, make up a quick breakfast, and continue heading south on my kayak. End up going down the Lost Man's River. See red circle in pic. Find a place down the river to camp. Set up camp, eat, and sleep. That would be my last comfortable night of sleep for the rest of the trip, and maybe the rest of my life. Wake up the next day refreshed, and head further down the river. Eventually hit the mainland. See blue circle on pic. I walk about 1.5 miles east before I decide to turn back. That was a mistake. I tripped, fell, hit my head, and knocked myself out. Fuck me. I wake up about 2 hours later. Pick myself up, orient myself, and start heading back towards the kayak. Gel to where the kayak was, and it was gone. The rope is still tied to a mangrove, but the middle is chewed through. It finally hits me. The kayak is fucking gone. My tent, most of my food, water, other gear, and, most importantly, my transportation is gone. I decide to get to dry land, as I don't want to be in the mangroves at night. I get to dry land, eat a granola bar, and decide to head northeast in the morning, to try and get help. I fall asleep with my head on my pack and next to a fire. I wake up, only 4 hours later, to the noise of howling. Wolf howling. Once again battled, seeing as they should be extinct around here, I shine my light into the brush. I see an absolutely gargantuan wolf, bigger than I've ever seen. Think the size of a rhinoceros. I flip the fuck out, and add what little dry wood I have to the fire. I spend the night clutching my rifle next to a dying fire. They eventually fuck off, but I don't let down my guard. Around sunrise, I immediately head northeast. I'm tired, hungry, thirsty, and just want to get help. I'm slowing trudging through knee-high Whaler. Consider ditching the rifle to get rid of weight, but then I remember those wolves. Keep going on and on, mindlessly, checking every 10 or so minutes to make sure I am on course. In the middle of these mangroves is a small dry area. I figure that I could rest here for a short while. I walk into the clearing and I see a structure. It's a pyramid. In the fucking Everglades. Think pic related, but smaller. I am dumbfounded at what a pyramid would be doing this far out here. I didn't think that the local tribes ever got this advanced. Should finish up next post. I needed to keep moving, but I just found a hidden pyramid in the middle of the Everglades. Archaeologists and historians would kill to find this. I figure I need to stop and at least look at the place. I climb up to the top, and there is a pit. Just a dark pit. Out of the pit I can hear something faint. I get down on all fours so I can hear it better. I realize that there is wailing coming from the pit. Griefful, painful, wailing. I promptly get up and try to get the fuck out of there. In a rush, I trip, see a pattern? After tripping, the wailing turns to straight up screaming. It sounds like a fucking banshee. I am convinced that anyone within 10 miles could have heard that shit, it was deafening. I started hurrying back down, when I see those damn dogs. There was a pack of 5 of them, all completely fucking huge. I drop my pack, and climb up a cypress tree. I fire all 5 of my rounds into the biggest fucker there. He bleeds out under the tree, while the screaming from the pyramid is just getting louder and louder. The pack drags away the dead dog into the mangroves. I take my opportunity, jump down, and start booking it northeast. I left my pack to save weight, and am going through the mangroves as fast as I possibly can. I even threw aside the rifle, as I have no ammo for it, and it is just dead weight. Eventually, after an hour, I can't hear the screaming anymore. I'm dehydrated as fuck and hungry, but I keep moving forward. I find myself on a road, loop road scenic drive, with a bunch of police cars. They hesitate when they see me, because I look like I've been through hell and back. They get me water and a granola bar, and tell me to sit tight for an ambulance. When I ask how they knew to find me, they said some guy on the road called in about hearing incessant shooting a couple hours prior, and they had been searching since. I get to the hospital, and the police interrogate me. Just finishing up. I hesitate, and tell them that I got lost, and fired those shots at an alligator. They accept it, and leave me alone. My family comes up in hysterics to see me. I confide in my dad about what actually happened. Naturally, he doesn't believe me, and said that the dehydration must have made me hallucinate it. I go home and keep bringing it up. Eventually he has me admitted to a psychiatrist for delusions and hallucinations. Gee, thanks Dad. I brought the story up to 2 different people, and both had the same response. I'm never going back to that place again, and I just want to forget about this, but I felt like I needed to tell someone. I don't care if you believe me or not, as no one else does, I just needed to get it out. I don't know what I found out there, and it will probably stay that way. Good night /x/ I'm going to bed. Cool story bro. Take someone else to that pyramid and get rich. Fuck huge native, wolves, get TFO by explorer and his rifle. Classic. Why didn't you tell about the pyramid though? Go to some archaeologist or college professor and tell them you found some pyramid on the forest, don't include the wolves or screaming, just the structure, maybe get some other guys to see it. Take me there, Anon. Let's hunt some spirits and wolves together. Bringing A/K/nut might actually help you out on this one. Just woke up, figure I may as well answer a few questions before I head out for the day. Did you feel any Indiana Jones vibes at all? Or just terror? Upon discovering the pyramid, I was still in survival mode. I guess I had a little bit of a Indiana Jones vibe, hence why I climbed to the top, but I mostly just wanted to get out of the Everglades as quick as possible. Mind you, I had heard and seen the wolves before I was dehydrated. I had a half-full water bottle with me after I lost the kayak, and by the time I saw the pyramid, I had been dehydrated for less than 24 hours. If I go up to any archaeologist or college professor, I doubt they would believe me. Finding a pyramid in the Everglades is unbelievable, and would rewrite the history of the whole region. Most people don't believe it, let alone waste resources or time on it. There is no way I am going back there. I steer clear of the West Everglades after that incident. Even if I did, I'm not 100% sure I could find the place again. Tell me the general location, I'll gladly die for some actual spooky shit, my dude. MFW, my great-grandfather's groundhog rifle is a M1903 Springfield. He must really not liked groundhogs. You were supposed to go into the pyramid and find a great sword in the clutches of a mummified Atlantean king and use it to cleave off your shackles and hew the Hyperborean dire wolves asunder with the great ancient blade and your iron thews while you call out an oath to Crom. But instead you fucked up so bad you not only failed to take revenge on the Serpent King who took your father's sword, but you let the reptiles have your great-grandfather's rifle too. Why the fuck would anybody kayak through a giant sweltering alligator spawning pit to begin with? There are campsites scattered along Listman's River. Some picnic benches, etc. Have a look around on Google Maps. It would be cool if it wasn't fake and he actually confirmed the existence of the pyramid-like structure off that river. Insert link to Miami Times here. I'm back, figure I may as well answer more questions. I don't suggest it. You could easily die out there, even without the paranormal jazz. Exposure and dangerous wildlife can easily kill you. Please don't go out alone, and please get to know the area first. Or, better yet, don't go at all. I've attached a better, more updated map, starting at Chokoloskee, where I first pushed off with my kayak. The green line is the first day, red line is the second day, purple line is the third day, and orange line is the fourth day. All black dots are where I camped or where I got picked up. I had to navigate through mangroves and crap on foot for the fourth day, so I figure that the temple could reasonably be anywhere in the orange circle, with the orange dashed line just being an approximation. Keck, I thought the same thing when I was given the rifle. Your comment made me chuckle. Why the fuck would anybody kayak through a giant sweltering alligator spawning pit to begin with? Another Anon already pointed it out, but the outer area, where I was kayaking in the first 2 days, have designated camping areas about every 2 or so miles. I suppose something about the area is just charming to people. I go because I like the area, and I like isolation, hence why I went even deeper. Not faked, but I appreciate the article. I've heard about other pyramids around the Everglades, but there seems to be only mentions of them here and there. I've also heard about one near the Listman's River, but I believe that their story says they just viewed the temple from a distance, never visiting it.
Okay, here's mine. Fair warning, I was drinking when this happened, but I was only about 4 beers deep, so I doubt I was hallucinating or some shit. Be me. Country just recently relaxed lockdown measures. Friends immediately call me and say that everyone's going to party by the reservoir. Normally I wouldn't go to that kinda thing, but I've been stuck at home for like 2 months, so fuck it. Fast forward to Friday night, my friends and I are sitting in a semicircle on a grassy bank near the reservoir. There's like 100 people there, but everyone's sort of split up into groups. Fires aren't allowed, but there's a floodlight nearby so everyone's visible, but it's still really dark. Friends and I are all drinking and talking shit. Eventually hear bells, like the jingling of little bells that a fucking Christmas elf might wear on their shoes or some fanciful shit like that. Nanny.jpg. Turn towards sound. Girl comes walking out of the dark from the direction of a nearby field, aka, complete blackness. Nobody else was in that direction. First thing I notice is that she's really pretty, like stone cold hottie with a body. Hair is really messy and she looks like she's wearing pajamas. Looks like she just got out of bed. She asks what we're all doing there. Partying? Lockdown's finally finished so we're allowed out again. Oh, I was wondering where everyone had gone. Okay. My friend eventually asks her if she wants to sit down, she accepts. Fucking nice one. Now we got the hottest girl I've ever seen sitting next to me. We all start talking and partying again. She's actually really talkative and funny. Is this love, brothers? Night continues. At a certain point I get a bit too drunk and make the worst fucking mistake of my life. Quick edit, this girl introduced herself as Marigold. Thought it was super weird but she was really hot so I just went with it, anyway. I noticed this flower growing on the bank next to where she was sitting and she said it was really pretty. I get it in my drunk head to pick it and give it to her. Real milady Reddit tier shit. I reach over her, I was on her right and the flower was on her left, and pluck the flower. As I pull back I hit her in the chin with the top of my head. WTF is wrong with me? Her hands are covering her face. I didn't know this at the time but the rest of our group had drifted off a couple of feet so we were sitting there alone. Oh shit, I'm so sorry. She's like, it's fine, I'm fine. She lowers her hands a bit, I can see like half her face. Pic related is the closest thing I can find online that resembled it. She has a porcelain doll face, not white as porcelain, it honest to God looked like it was made of porcelain. Painted like a medieval court jester with red lips and nose. Looked more comical than pic related, this was just the best I could find. Nose was longer, and the face was almost half moon shaped, had the same kinda hat though. It split down the middle and had two tendril type things with little gold bells at the tips. I'm fucking terrified at this point. She looks like she noticed and quickly covers her face again, it looks like she was pressing it into place like it was a mask but it was more like she was a doll 1 minute and a human the next. She looks back at me again and smiles. She's perfect again, completely beautiful and charming. I just kinda sat there for a while, dazed. She eventually gets up and tells everyone she's leaving, that's when I realized that only I saw that. My friends say goodbye and ask if she needs a lift, she says no and just walks back off into the dark. After a few seconds my female friends say it isn't safe and pressure the boys to go make sure she gets home safe. I flat out refuse but two other guys agree and go after her. They come back like 5 minutes later saying she was gone, they never saw her anywhere. Eventually I went home, still kinda shell-shocked. The next day I'm talking to my mates about it. All the guys are like, yeah that girl was hot but really fucking weird. None of them say they saw anything wrong with her face. Weird part comes later. I'm talking to my one female friend about it. She had no idea what I'm talking about. I'm like, remember that girl who came out of the field? That weird fucking girl. She says no, there was a weird person who came out of the field and sat with us but it was a guy. She says it was a guy who called himself Marigold and he was the hottest guy she had ever seen. All my female friends confirm the second story. They seem to all think it was weird that we all remember a different person but only I saw the jester face. Let me tell you about the Longman of Tawaknoi, Anon. Always visit grandma and parents at least once a month. They live out in Lake Tawaknoi in East Texas. Bumfuck middle of nowhere, pastures and lakes. Lakes are filling up real good this year by the way, almost 6 feet above average. Me, brother, his girl go camping because tired of family shit. The equivalent of staking a tent in the middle of a barren ass field because we ain't got no woods out here son. We all get drunk off our ass and pass out. Wake up early with a hangover. It's about 0430 going off my phone. Leave tent to go take a piss. See man walking across the field. No biggie, probably just a hunter. It stops when it sees me. Gives me this really weird ass wave, as if its entire arm was stiff. Wave back. Guy keeps standing there, waving. Crawl back into tent and wake my brother up. Couldn't have been in the tent more than 10 seconds since all I did was give a boot to his side. Step back outside. This motherfucker cleared 600 yards in 10 seconds. Standing and waving that stiff ass arm. Chill runs down my back, hair stands up on end. Know from previous experience that this shit ain't good. Tell brother to grab his gun. That woke his ass up. He comes out with his rifle. Tell him to aim it at that thing. Thing stops waving. Tell his girlfriend to get into the truck. Both are still shit-faced and hungover, but oblige. Take the rifle and keep it trained on that thing. Its fucking arms unfold. The reason its arms were so stiff and waving is because it was waving them like a retard with its arms bent up to its shoulder. Motherfucker had like 6-foot long arms. He stopped slouching. Easily 8 feet tall, going off a distance of 450 yards. The most banshee-like screech I've ever heard mixed with a guttural roar emits from the thing. Its jaw distends to the point that it's where its collarbone should be. Potshot it. Thing lanks onto all fours and hightails it away from us. We come back to the campsite later that afternoon with our shotgun filled with buckshot and the AR-15 just in case, of course. Tent is shredded, all our food is gone. Track the garbage towards the swamp line. See a ripped apart muskrat hanging from a tree. We both decided to call it quits and just get the fuck out of there. I can't even properly describe the thing we saw. It looked like a fucking bad human with how disproportionate its arms and legs were. Like fucking seriously, he unfolded his arms like a praying mantis and each of its fingers were nearly a foot long. My brother thinks it was a chupacabra, but I'm pretty sure it was some kind of skinwalker.
I have a story I saved from last year, I think. It was from an ex-Royal Marine. Everything is written from his point of view. I've frequented X for a few months now, but have been coming to 4chan in general since 2009. I was in the Royal Navy, British, for 13 years, serving as a Royal Marine. The story I'm going to share with you was experienced by myself and mates I served with. There are various details of the story I have to leave out due to legal constraints. Most of this still isn't open to the public. It starts in June 2004. I've just been given notice I'm to do a 2-week stint serving on the HMS Lancaster for specialist duties the next day. During my career I was trained in specialist diving techniques and have done a lot maritime training with the SBS lads. A lot of the ops I'm sent on involve some sort of diving or at least some underwater element to them. When I press my commanding officer for more details on what I'll be doing on a shitty little frigate for 2 weeks, he tells me not to ask and just go. I'll be told everything when I get there. So I eventually get on the HMS Wankstein at Portsmouth. I'm met by 2 SBS lads, one of which I know. Let's call them Frank and Eddie, Frank being the one I know. Both are pretty big lads and can easily handle themselves. One look will tell you that they've been through hard times. We get ourselves sorted and the frigate leaves. We sit down for dinner and I ask them if they know anything about what we'll be doing. They were given the same orders I was. All they know is it's a waterborne op somewhere in UK waters. The actual location is non-disclosable, but I can tell you it was off the coast of Scotland. That evening we're given a briefing by a naval intelligence officer. We'll call him Craig. Craig tells us where we are going and what we'll be doing for the 2 weeks, which includes conducting underwater reconnaissance of volcanically active seabeds, caves. This sounds like BS to the 3 of us straight away. It doesn't take a specialist Royal Marine diver and 2 maritime counter-terrorism operatives to poke around some caves. We voice our concerns, but Craig insists it's a routine study of possibly seismologically and volcanically active underwater terrain. We don't press the matter, but something is definitely up. We arrive at the target locale and get all our scuba gear on. We're given these little instruments that read CO2 levels in the water. We are to look for concentrated points on a patch of seabed we were tasked with checking. We have comms to the frigate and must stay in constant contact. We go below the surface and make our way down to the seabed. It's not far, about 25 meters. We begin a methodical sweep of the bed and communicate CO2 readouts back to the Lancaster. After about 10 minutes, we don't find any readouts that we consider to be significantly high, and the Lancaster directs us to a different patch. The terrain goes down a little, about 30 to 35 meters below the surface. Light is pretty poor and we have to use these clunky underwater force strapped to our wetsuits. We searching around for a couple of minutes before we begin to get an uneasy feeling, like we shouldn't really be there. I stop and look around. Frank is doing the same, like he feels it too. We talk a little, mostly to calm ourselves down. Eddie continues to do the readouts over our conversations. Suddenly he stops mid-readout, but keeps his comms line open. He's clearly distressed by something. We swim over to him, asking him if he's okay. We get to him and literally stop mid-swim. My body goes completely and immediately cold, like someone flicked a switch. In front of Eddie is the rotting, bloated, disfigured corpse of a grown man. He's been tied down to the bottom of the seabed and has chunks of himself missing. His face is disfigured, his throat is cut open, his belly is torn and his intestines are hanging out. He's completely naked and his penis has a large spike hammered into it. We just hang there, bobbing up and down off the seabed for about 10 seconds, taking it in. Frank moves his hand to the pre-sail underneath his wetsuit and opens his comm line with the frigate. He tells them what we found. There's not an immediate reply and we wait for a few seconds before Craig comes over the net. He tells us to retrieve the body and bring it back to the frigate, which is what we do. We were all pretty quiet that night. The body was slumped onto a trolley and was led away by Craig, the frigate's commander, whose name escapes me now, and a small group of guys. We didn't see the body again, and when we asked if they'd identified the man, Craig brushed us off. We know the man was identified. Again, cannot disclose, and we believe the body was taken back to mainland UK. Eddie was clearly still affected by the ordeal the day afterwards. Again, we were sent into the abyss and told we would now be searching a formation of underwater caves nearby to where we found the body. Our search began pretty normally, except for the readouts. We'd binned the idea that we were there to check CO2 levels and confronted Craig. He dropped the story and told us this area was a hotspot for marine life activity not yet documented. We asked if it was in any way linked to the body we found, which, again, he brushed off. After this, we point-blank refused to go down there unarmed, and we were given spring-loaded harpoons that could easily kill a man at 10 meters. I've used them before and know from experience these are lethal. We enter the caves and detect an immediate drop in temperature. The caves are pretty straightforward, just one large cavern after another. We search around for about 5 minutes before anything happens. We are about to enter from one cavern into another through a small opening in a rock face when we hear a high-pitched shriek from deep within the caverns. Because it's underwater, it's muffled and sounds like a gargling screech, but it's still clearly audible. We all freeze and look between each other. We wait about a minute before we hear it again. It echoes off the cavern's walls and bounces around, making it hard to judge in which particular direction it's coming from. Frank opens comms with the Lancaster and reports what we've just heard. Craig comes onto the net again and asks if we've had any visual contact. Frank tells him we haven't, and he comes back telling us to explore further and find evidence of the creature that made the sound. We stare unbelieving at each other. We're pretty rough blokes who've been through the wars, those two especially, but fuck, are we shitting ourselves. We reluctantly swim on into the next cavern, harpoons pointed forward, fingers on triggers. It's plain to all of us that this isn't a naturally formed cavern. The walls are too smooth, and there's pillar-like structures at regular intervals along the sides of the cavern. We explore further and find what appears to be markings along the walls of the cavern, like cave paintings or hieroglyphics. They're hard to make out, but they show underwater humanoid-like creatures, something one might describe as a mermaid. There is outmarkings on the wall that resemble some form of written language, symbols appearing often, marked in a structured format, etc. We're about halfway through the cavern when we hear the shriek again, only closer this time. Seconds afterwards, it's met by another, longer and higher-pitched shriek that sounds nearer to us. We stop and scan the cavern. Our torches are strong and easily illuminate the entire cavern and show multiple exits. Eddie, to my left, begins to flail about. He shoots his harpoon, which flies through the water, hitting the ceiling of the cavern. Me and Frank turn to look at him and see blood leaking from his arm. He's holding it and watching something with wide eyes. I follow his gaze and see a small figure dart through one of the holes in the cavern. We ask him if he's okay and what happened. He's breathing heavily and pleads with us to leave. We don't need much convincing and begin to leave. As we are exiting, shrieks begin to ring throughout the caves, too many for us to count, like a swarm of the fuckers. We begin to panic and swim out of there as fast as we fucking can. Images of the man we found tear through my head. We exit the cave and swim as fast as our legs will take us to the surface. The shrieks died away as we left the caves, but we don't slow down. We break the surface and scramble onto the deck. We drop our scuba kit and rip off our goggles. Craig comes out to meet us, asking us what happened. Frank loses his shit and almost decks the guy. Eddie calls a medic over to take a look at his arm. He cuts off the arm of his wetsuit to reveal bite marks on his forearm. I turn to Craig, who is still getting a bollocking from Frank. He holds up his hands and tells him to calm down. This fires up Frank even more. I step in and tell Frank to go help Eddie. Craig strides off back into the hull of the frigate. By this time, practically the whole crew of 130 are out on deck to check out what's going on. Later that evening, Craig calls us into the briefing room. He tells us the op's been cancelled and we are returning to Portsmouth. Eddie was given a tetanus shot and his arm was wrapped in bandages. He made a full recovery. I never saw Craig again, and I left the Royal Navy a year later. 3 years after I left the Navy, I bumped into Frank whilst in Bournemouth for a weekend. We went out and got a drink and talked about it all again. He told me that since then the Royal Navy had been conducting exploratory operations in the area we were, and he personally knew some of the lads they were using on a regular basis to continue with the searches for the marine life not yet documented. Eddie had got out as well and was working for the Blackwater private security company. He'd tried speaking to him about what attacked him that time, but he's very reserved about it and doesn't like to discuss it. We never did find out exactly what it was, but we do know there is nothing like it that science knows of. I've since had visits from various different naval and army intelligence personnel to discuss with me what I saw and the importance of keeping this strictly under wraps. This is the first time I've publicly disclosed this information, including to my family and close friends. I imagine I'm going to be getting a visit in the morning by some less than savory characters, but at least I didn't say the really secret stuff. I do value my life, after all. End. Still one of my favorites. Haven't seen a post from him since though.